All right. Well, what else you got for us?
Well, why don't we bounce through polygamy real quick, because no discussion of Mormon history is truly complete, right?
Yeah, and we have to begin with just this idea that and you'll probably cover this, but the sealing power of the Melchizedek priesthood was revealed when?
Oh, the sealing?
Yeah, the sealing power. Let's just say...
Was that the Elijah one?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd have to check the chronology. I don't remember.
What's relevant is that Fanny Alger, Joseph's apparently first wife,
right?
He had sexual relations with her prior to the sealing power even allegedly being, who knows if there was really a sealing power bestowed, but Joseph Smith was already having sex with Fanny Alger, hiding it from Emma before the sealing power or the polygamy revelation
even became a notion
were ever given.
Right.
And so that's where, and so authority and polygamy actually intersect.
Yes.
But let's go ahead and talk about polygamy.
Well, this I think is terribly important to understand D&C 101 and the original definition of LDS marriage.
The Book of Commandments 101, right?
D&C 101, which no longer exists because it was removed.
So that was the previous version of the D&C.
Yes. Yeah. But first, I just want to, it is, polygamy remains doctrine. It's just not practiced in this life, but you can have two wives now as long as you're sealed in the temple and one's passed away. Polygamy is practiced for eternity even today. Would you agree to that?
By Nelson and by Oakes.
Oh, by many, yeah. You can seal yourself up today to more than one wife for the eternity. So polygamy remains doctrine. We just don't practice it with the law of the land.
Yeah.
And you can't have, obviously, at the same time. So D&C 101 was the original definition of LDS marriage, and it made it into the D&C. It wasn't just the Book of Commandments. It was sustained at General Conference in 1835, and it said, inasmuch as this church has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman, but one husband. Makes sense, even though by then they were practicing polygamy, right? But they basically declared one man, one woman. But then D&C 32 contradicts that. D&C 32 is the meat of the polygamy stuff, where basically Emma was threatened that she'd be destroyed. There's a loophole in here for the men that says if the first wife does not accept the rule of the husband, then she becomes a transgressor and he's exempt from the law, which is awesome. I mean, that's pretty convenient. You can ask your wife, but if she disagrees, then it's her problem, and she'll be destroyed naturally. So that's how this conflict arose between the original definition, one man, one woman, and then D&C 132, which says polygamy is okay.
And it's really confusing because the Book of Mormon says, no to polygamy unless God has a reason to raise up a righteous seed or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
So you've got the Book of Mormon saying no polygamy. But then, and I'm showing this from the Joseph Smith papers, you've got the earlier version of the D&C 101 denying that polygamy exists and saying it's not part of the gospel, it's not part of what we do, it's wrong, it shouldn't happen.
Which is just one of many denials.
And this would have been after Joseph had already been with Fanny Alger.
Right.
So that doesn't make sense. Even apologists are saying, well, Fanny Alger's the first wife, but he took her to bed before even the D&C was forbidding polygamy. Yeah. So he's taking her to bed. There's no revelation. There's no sealing power. There's no polygamy revelation. There's no sealing power. Then Joseph takes Fanny Alger to bed. Then they come out with the D&C saying, no polygamy. Polygamy is not what we do. It's bad. That's D&C 101 of a previous version of the D&C. Then, then Oliver comes out with the truth about Fanny Alger. It almost wrecks the church. Then Joseph starts, when he gets to Nauvoo, taking more wives. And then when Emma's really pissed, miraculously, Joseph Smith comes up with the polygamy revelation.
Yeah. Well, then he gives her all these plots of land to pacify her, and that's all in the record. So basically what happened there, even if you follow D&C 132 and the rules laid out in 132 for the practice of polygamy, Joseph Smith violated those rules anyway. It just doesn't make sense. No matter which rule book or which way you slice it, it's just a quagmire. But on July 12th, 1843, Joseph deeded Emma 65 parcels of church property. Okay, that's July 12th. The very same, day or time period that Joseph Smith was dictating the polygamy revelation, he's got to get Emma to buy into this. And so and there's more history here, and there's records of Emma being upset and Joseph being worried. And I don't remember if it was William Clayton or whatever the scribe was at the time, recounted how he was instructed by Joseph to go and, do this thing to pacify Emma. But basically she was deeded 65 parcels of prime church property there in Nauvoo, dozens of lots, 9 entire blocks. And they marked it as, $10,000. Anyway, this looks like a quid pro quo transaction to pacify Emma, who was also being very vocal in the Relief Society at various times, using it as a platform to rally against polygamy. But anyway, there's a lot going on here behind the scenes. It's all in the historical record of who is giving who land, pacifying for what, transferring property into Emma's name.
I have to say really quickly, I'm thrilled that the Gluth sisters have joined us. There are housewife scholars that live in Arkansas, and they're twins, and they're brilliant. Aaron writes, D&C 101 was left in the D&C for a long time until 1876. So the church conveniently kept D&C 101 in the D&C long after it was practicing polygamy, because it was hiding it and denying it and trying to do it in secret. So long after the church was explicitly, actively practicing polygamy, it's still kept in the scriptures that it was forbidden as a way to kind of show the public that polygamy wasn't happening. And then Kristen Gluth Cranny writes, Priesthood Restoration and Authority present both historical inconsistencies as well as present-day inequality and social justice issues. Double whammy. So
those have never been big concerns to the church. Sorry, but it's just...
Conveniently.
Racism, nah.
Sexism,
We're good. Polygamy. The only thing that stopped polygamy was the threat of federal prosecution and the confiscation of temples and property. I mean, that's the only thing that stopped polygamy was federal threat.
Yeah, because the Brethren had said it was required. It was required for exaltation. So you can't. You can't have prophets saying polygamy is required for the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, and then just kind of chuck it when it's not convenient, right?
Well, you can actually. Well, then you get to the Partridge Sisters, as we're talking about polygamy, and there's certain episodes here: the Lawrence Sisters, the Partridge Sisters. So February 1843, Joseph deeded parcels of land to Emma and Eliza Partridge. Then he secretly marries them. And then, isn't this the one? The Kimballs. The Kimballs were used to facilitate that liaison? No. They were to meet at the Kimballs. Elizabeth Dufree, who Joseph Smith had also, I believe, married, was the liaison to persuade the young girls to come and meet in private at the Kimballs. Anyway, there's just a lot going on here. So then Emma finally consents, and Joseph sets up this mock ceremony because he'd already married him. So now he has to do this fake second ceremony because he doesn't want to tell Emma that he's already married the house nannies. These were teenage nannies living under the prophet's roof. And he used their inheritance, I believe. I get the Partridge Sisters and the Lawrence Sisters mixed up. He bought the Times and Seasons with one. He bought a riverboat with the other. I mean, he vaporized the inheritance with the riverboat. But yeah, there's this whole issue of trusteeship, even without the sexual allegations. There's this whole thing about stewardship and what he did with their money and where it went and where it didn't go. It's pretty fascinating stuff. But the Lord,
just imagine that you're put in the care of orphans, young teenage girls, and sisters, and you're not. It's not just that you're sleeping with them; you're sleeping with both of them secretly making them your wives, and not telling your spouse. It's outrageous on every single possible level. And if I did that to anyone's children,
you'd be in jail.
I'd be in jail or killed.
You'd be dead, probably.
I'd probably be dead.
And he was dead.
Yeah,
he did get himself dead. But the thing is, though, here too, I had a thought there for a minute. I in the past, I'm guilty. I defended polygamy as well. That was just something that was practiced as we came across the plains because there were so many more women. The men had been killed and persecuted, and there were so many women in need of help to get across the plains that I repeated that at various points in time because that's what I was instructed.
Yeah,
and that's not how this thing played out. The Lawrence sisters were the other one. It's all on the website. Secretly married them. after the father. This is the one he purchased the times and seasons with their inheritance, leveraged their assets to obtain the Maid of Iowa. This is the one that blew up William Law, is Joseph Smith's counselor. When he found out about the Lawrence sisters, that's what triggered him. I think that was maybe the final straw, because he knew the Lawrence family from Canada. And so I think he felt a bond with these girls. So when he found out what Joseph was up to there, that's, I think, the final straw with what pushed William Law out to, do what he did.
Yeah, and that's another thing, and this is relevant with the E.D. Howe stuff as well. We have been conditioned as Mormons to distrust and discount anything from anti-Mormon sources. Right. And so like Mormonism Unveiled or the Novel Expositor that William Law put together, well, don't read that because it's anti-Mormon.
Yeah, they're just
literature.
Down. Right.
But the truth is, these people that were right there living at the time, having loved ones affected by what was going on, who's gonna investigate a charlatan? Who's gonna take down a Ponzi scheme other than someone who's been defrauded or someone who,
these were the president,
a loved
he was
one,
the presidency counselor,
a loved one of someone been defrauded. Right. So that's what's been so clever about the way that we've been conditioned is that the people that actually were the most credible, William Law being in the first presidency. Yeah. We somehow have been conditioned to think they're just bitter and angry and under the control of Satan. So you should ignore the people who actually were the victims.
Well, and we've been conditioned to worship the prophets a little bit, praise to the man. And so there's an awesome video, and I don't know if we kept it on your website or not, if it was too threatening, but it's a talk at BYU, Idaho, I believe it was. And is it Jason Kunstler was the professor or the talker, and he's talking about Brother Joseph. I think it's on the website, on the Joseph Smith page, because it talks about how we revere Joseph Smith. And it is the most emotionally loaded worship fest to Joseph Smith and how he did no wrong. And Brother Joseph, someday. It was just fascinating to watch him. Now, what I know about actual factual Mormon history, to watch this talk and the defense of Joseph Smith and how he did no wrong and he committed no sin, to see how we revere him in context of actual history. That talk, I just put that one out there as an outstanding example of how emotionally loaded and worked up we can get over Brother Joseph without addressing what Brother Joseph was actually up to. Yeah,
it's
and the denials, we got to get, we'll close out with the denials of, times and seasons, it's all there. But basically, in the end, Joseph was lying from the pulpit, oh, what a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can find only one. Well, he had like 32 at the time or whatever the magic number was. So it goes towards that credibility issue. If you play with words, it wasn't polygamy. It was spiritual wifery. It was celestial marriage. It was, all these different terms that they used to mask what was actually going on.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure polygamy in and of itself can be justifiable.
Right.
But again, if you combine that with the treasure digging, the inaccuracies in the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, the witnesses, the bank fraud, and just all the credibility issues. It's just it becomes untenable if you're willing to consider the evidence.
Right. Well, in the times and seasons, I think it was. So October 1842, that's when Smith mustered 31 prominent members to including Emma and all of her counselors, many of which were already compromised by polygamy. To certify, I certify and declare that we know of no system of marriage being practiced, where did it say here, in the church, save the one contained in the book of D&C, meaning one man, one woman.
Meaning D&C 101.
Yeah. So they were, and it's fascinating to look at Emma's own Relief Society and how many of her counselors were compromised with polygamy without her knowledge, and now they're all up here lying about it. So, I mean, it's just part of our history.
Yeah.
It's still doctrine.
And of course, Lindsay Hansen Park has a series that a lot of people love called Year of Polygamy, where she goes into the polygamy even more in depth. and Todd Compton's book, In Sacred Loneliness. You can hear my interview of him, one of the first Mormon Stories interviews, going way, way back. And, we've covered polygamy a lot, including interviewing Brian Hales on Mormon Stories and trying to discern between Grant Palmer's claims that Joseph Smith was kind of a sexual predator, including trying to marry William Law's wife and offering William Law to Emma so that Emma could have a little bit of something on the side too.
It's in D&C 132.
Yeah.
That which I offered you is now rescinded. I mean, there's a lot in 132 that you don't recognize until you read it and know what you're looking at.
Yeah. And so it's almost like swinging almost.
Yeah. Once I got into this, I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
I was like, I kept, really? What? And it just the gift keeps on giving. Are we okay on the light here?
Yeah.
Can we do Book of Abraham?
Yeah, all right, Book of Abraham.
So I've been tasked with keeping us moving because we have been accused of rambling in Mormon Stories Podcast.
By
before.
who?
No, I don't know.
Who has ever accused?
I have no idea.
I am outraged. If any of you have ever accused Mormon Stories episodes of being too long,
don't know,
or rambly, I'm offended.
I don't know,
and I condemn you. I strike you down.
I can
with my words of authority and power. Don't you
eternal
dare,
damnation.
Don't you dare speak ill against the podcast anointed.
All right, so Book of Abraham, one of our canonized special, only Mormon scriptures, right? So back then, Egyptian stuff was cool, man. I mean, this was the age of discovery, Indiana Jones kind of stuff, They were uncovering mummies and tombs and all kinds of cool stuff, Egypt and elsewhere. And so there was this air of mystery and lore, and, this was cool stuff. So 1835, this Irishman had these mummies and scrolls, and he's wandering around East Coast United States selling these things. He'd already sold a lot of them, and he had some more. And I suspect maybe he heard about Joseph Smith, and so he wandered on over and showed them to Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith proclaimed, one of the scrolls contained the writings of Abraham, and another the writings of Joseph of Egypt. That's straight from the history of the church. And the members were tasked with rounding up the money. In classic fashion, Joseph Smith tasked the members with rounding up the money. So they buy these mummies and scrolls, and then Joseph gets busy. I was continually engaged in translating an alphabet of the Book of Abraham. This is where you get into the Gale, the grammar and Egyptian language thing that he used. But basically, 7 years later, Joseph Smith comes forth with this translation of these scrolls that he got from the mummies that he said were in the hand of Abraham, and blah blah blah. Well, it's very important to understand what Joseph Smith said about these scrolls. And John, I had no idea. I didn't know there were issues with the Book of Abraham because we hardly talk about it. It's not like the Book of Mormon where we read the thing all the time. But basically, this was very important writings from Abraham himself, from his hand. And then the Rosetta Stone had been discovered, but nobody had quite, they were figuring it out, and it was becoming known how to translate, very accurate Egyptian, but nobody knew this at the time. So here's where we end up now, and John, jump in and correct me because I'm moving quickly through this, but basically we're in a position now where we can translate very accurate Egyptian. We know a lot more about
thanks to the Rosetta Stone. And just archaeology and just where we've come.
And basically everything that Joseph said about these scrolls has been proven to be dead wrong. They've been tested. They're not old enough. It's not by the hand of Abraham. They do not contain the language that's in the Book of Abraham.
They don't contain the word Abraham.
Abraham's not even mentioned.
It's not even.
They're basically a book of breathings, and so wealthy, parishioners or whatever we would call them would pay these people to transcribe on these scrolls their book of breathings that they would carry with them into the next life that would enable them to live and survive. And that's
so funeral
script, standard funeral text. And if you think about this for a minute, and this didn't dawn on me till the end, it's totally absurd that anybody would be writing in standard funeral text Some people have suggested, well, the scrolls weren't long enough, that there was actually more text and it's just not on these scrolls. But the very notion that they would put something like that on Egyptian funeral text makes no sense in context whatsoever anyway. But so they've tried, in the face of overwhelming evidence and even admission by the church that these scrolls don't say Abraham and they're not old enough. So there's other theories that have been advanced about the scrolls were longer and we don't really know where Joseph got but then the symbols line up, and there's so many things here that I'm just going to skip through. You can read the essay. They do line up and they match, and we know those are the ones. There's a lot of reasons why we know that. The church today concedes none of the characters on the papyrus fragments mentioned Abraham's name or any of the events recorded in the book of Abraham. So that's the church acknowledging this in the Gospel Topics essay. The relationship of these documents to the book of Abraham is not fully understood.
Which is an understatement.
It's kind of understood, yeah. And we're just confronted with the experts that know Egyptian. It may safely be said that there is not one single word that is true in these explanations. So this book of Abraham for a lot of people is just the silver bullet of Joseph Smith proclaiming to translate and proclaiming to bring forth revelation in Scripture. See, because we don't have the plates, we don't have the manuscripts and all the things that from the Book of Mormon, but we do have them from the Book of Abraham, and literally every single thing he made here is just wrong. And he filled in the blanks on some of the damaged, the facsimiles, the images, and he turned one of the Egyptian gods into Abraham when it was really the god of sex with the little erection. I mean, it's that crazy, right? It's just, it's all there. And this is Scripture to us now.
Right.
And this is where we get the race doctrine. The Book of Abraham contains the basis for the LDS race doctrine against the blacks. Am I correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway,
apologists, and I just, again, preparing for my interview with RFM or Radio Free Mormon, I listened to an episode where he talks about, he interviews Patrick Mason, and Patrick Mason gives this really involved explanation. He's a lovely human, by the way, Patrick Mason, but he basically talks about, the theory that the reason why Joseph had the papyra was to inspire him to channel revelation from God that produces, and that even though Joseph thought he knew Egyptian and told everyone he was translating Egyptian, that in reality what God was really doing was channeling revelation through Joseph. Yeah. So Joseph didn't know what he was doing. Right. Joseph was telling other people that he was doing something he wasn't, but that's all the wonderful, beautiful mysteries of God.
Yeah, it's the catalyst theory.
The catalyst theory, producing the Book of Abraham. And again, like this in isolation, it's like, okay, no, but maybe, but no. Yeah. But then you add the 50 other things, and it's just like,
well, and the catalyst,
to what lengths will apologists go? Right. To twist the logic and the evidence and the justifications.
Yeah. Well, and it gets even better because you can now, I didn't know who Emanuel Swedenborg was. Why would I know Emanuel Swedenborg? So first of all, the catalyst theory is disproven by the text itself. Abraham 1:12 links the text with the first of the facsimiles. So it links what Joseph was working with the Book of Abraham. So it wasn't just this inspiration or catalyst. Even the Book of Abraham itself contradicts this notion that he was just not working with the papyri. But Emanuel Swedenborg wrote Heaven and Hell. There's a longer name for that, but Heaven and Hell in 1758, and it became fairly well known, in this religious community that Joseph was in. Emanuel Swedenborg elaborates upon celestial kingdom, 3 heavens corresponding 3 degrees of heaven, corresponding the sun, the moon, and the stars. You have to be married in heaven to inherit the highest degree. The spirit world is a place of preparation, opposition in all things. To qualify for perdition is to know the truth and to deny it, and that the law of consecration was celestial, and on and on. All of these things came from Emanuel Swedenborg. The racial discrimination, that's all in there, which the church today refutes its own Book of Abraham. in denying the doctrine that's been Mormon doctrine, which of course is crazy, but they didn't change the scripture that supports it. So the Book of Abraham is a total mess. Yeah. And most of my friends and people I try to explain it to have absolutely no idea how totally discredited the Book of Abraham is.
And it's canonized scripture. It's not like this is just some, edition of the Times and Seasons or the Millennial
some
Star.
off-the-cuff thing. No.
This is like
7 years
canonized scripture. And then when you combine the problems of the Book of Mormon with the problems of the Book of Abraham, and then you realize that the Kinderhook plates, Joseph actually translated plates that were manufactured to fool him.
Well, you said that quick. I want to make sure people heard the Kinderhook plates.
Kinderhook plates.
A whole different deal.
Yeah, like pretty much all, and then the Bible's got its own problems. If you listen to David Bokovoy, it's all, the Old Testament probably didn't exist. The Old Testament characters, Moses, Abraham,
literal Abraham,
probably didn't exist. Certainly not Adam and Eve and Noah. It really is a house of cards.
Yeah, well, in the Joseph Smith translation, since we're on a roll here, the JST, which we really never talk about. BYU, the scholars there released a study finding, quote, significant borrowing of Adam Clarke's Bible summaries. So basically, Joseph Smith was cribbing Adam Clarke's Bible summaries. Clarke is the primary source Smith used. I mean, this is BYU studies coming out with the sources that Joseph Smith copied from to come up with the JST.
And there's also I'll just repeat this 1,000 times. On the Mormon Stories website under Truth Claims, there's an entire essay on the Book of Abraham. There's an entire essay on the book of
the JST,
the Joseph Smith translation. So,
and some of them are short. The Book of Abraham one I kept intentionally brief because it's such a rat's nest of potential trails to go down. And Dan Vogel does some outstanding videos on this, by the way, his YouTube channel. I mean, just go there. I mean, if you really want to dig into it. But this is kind of the starter,
Yeah.
I'd never heard of the Kinderhook plates.
Right. I think they're in the CES letter.
Well, yeah, but I mean, until my search, I'd never heard of them.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's that. I mean, there's the translation abilities. There's the works, the standard works. Why don't we wrap this up with, I definitely got to get to the race doctrine and tithing. Can we do that? Do we have time for that?
Of course.
All right. So, race doctrine.
And just so people understand, we've got things we haven't covered. The Council of 50, which was the super secret, organization that seemed to have some really violent kind of intentions or even actions. That's really important. The Kinderhook plates, there's a full essay on that. There's all sorts of stuff in the Book of Mormon that we haven't covered.
And we can cover more. I don't need to end here. I want to respect for people's time. I want to.
No, let's go to priesthood. Let's go to race and skin color.
All right. Well, there's two problems. There's the black doctrine and the brown doctrine.
Okay.
Right. So the black one is that, we denied the saving ordinances and salvation to, a massive percentage of God's children because they were the wrong color. And I've already covered, my initial encounter with the race essay and how they try to say it was policy and not doctrine. Can you go to these slides, John?
I can. Go ahead and start talking about it.
Okay, so basically what we're up to now is yesterday's prophets are today's heretics, right? So yesterday's prophets were absolutely declaring this to be God's will and doctrine. There's no room for error on this. It was absolutely doctrine. The reasons of why it was doctrine can be debated. Were they unrighteous in their first estate? That was, that was McConkie or whoever forwarded that one. But basically, do you have this one up?
Yep.
So I'm gonna give a shout out to Miston Sunday School here. I think we may have used some slides here already, but there's some. This is a guy who makes these memes, these little visuals, right?
A Cache Valley homie.
Craig, man, I don't know the guy, but I like his stuff. So
it's a picture of George Albert Smith, right?
Yeah. So here's prophet of the church. Basically, the attitude, with reference to the Negroes, is not a matter of policy, but of direct commandments and doctrine. Okay?
From the Lord.
On
which is founded the doctrine of the church from the days of its organization.
Right.
That's 1949.
Oh, yeah. And he's just reiterating, saying,
And that's a statement of the first presidency. So it's...
Yeah, as it has always stood. Right.
Right.
This isn't news. Yeah. And then you've got, can you go to this one where Oaks can't tell the difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Read that.
So this now.
It's a picture of Dallin H. Oaks.
This is Dallin H. Oaks. And it says, I don't know that it's possible to distinguish between policy and doctrine in a church that believes in continuing revelation and sustains its leader as a prophet. Well, that is a phenomenally, awesomely convenient philosophy to have if you're a prophet who keeps changing the rules.
But it contradicts what a former prophet says,
Well, of course.
right? I mean,
Of
because
course.
the former statement's saying it's
Yeah.
clearly distinguishing between
Right.
prophet and doctrine explicitly
Right.
by the first presidency.
Yeah.
And then you've got Oaks later saying, how in the world?
We just don't know.
How do you possibly distinguish
Yeah,
between doctrine
and don't worry about it.
How
It's
do you
ended.
know?
Yeah, these little flicks of history. It's over. So, I mean, in brief, there's the black problem. And one of your questions, one of your listeners earlier asked a question about whether the race ban lifted the way it was said, or if there was more to it. And I would encourage anybody to read this book, Leonard Arrington, The Writing of Mormon History. This is Greg Prince, right? Yeah.
And we've covered that book on Mormon Stories.
This
so
is
we've
a
interviewed
great,
Greg Prince about
great
that book.
about the time in the 60s and 70s when a church historian was going through this. Anyway, so you'll get a lot out of that book about how the race ban actually lifted, and it involved a lot more lobbying and behind the scenes, chatter than you might suspect.
Q.B. Brown and others lobbying for the change.
Yeah.
And
And did Jimmy Carter really, Jimmy Carter banned him from the administration and had a little conversation with him. And the Stanford basketball team or whatever wouldn't play, Mormons or any organization that,
wouldn't play BYU in basketball.
Yeah. But really it was the church figuring out that they were growing in Brazil and that the members were donating money to the temple and, got their attention that it was time to make a change. But yeah, that whole episode didn't go down quite the way we were taught.
You've got this Kimball quote. Do you want to talk about the Kimball quote?
The Brown one? Okay, so Kimball... All right, well, this one is... Now let's move on to the Brown Doctrine. So basically, anybody who's spent much time with the Book of Mormon knows it's not just a passing reference to skin color, that the unrighteous Indians were darkened to be undesirable to the lighter-skinned brethren. Is that fair?
And I just have to say, we talk about truth claims scientific, just the fact that the Book of Mormon is endorsing this super racist skin and Book of Abraham, Moses, whatever, this super racist doctrine about God caring about skin color, favoring light over dark, cursing people with dark skin to be dark and loathsome.
Right.
I mean, where does that come from?
I never thought of it like that. I mean, here I am in Venezuela telling these people this is the history of their people.
Yeah, we're telling this to them.
Never,
and they're proud of it.
I mean,
in Guatemala, it's like soy la manita, soy la.
Yeah, I'm white splaining this to them.
Lamanite, right?
Yeah. I'm white splaining this to them as a 19-year-old on how their heritage works. So basically, in this, this was one of the prophets I grew up on. Here's a little member girl. He's from conference talks elaborating on the literal transformation of physical skin color. The a little girl, 16, sitting between the dark father and mother. It was evident she was several shades lighter than her parents. These young members of the church are changing to whiteness and to delightsomeness. Okay, that's general conference. And it never occurred to me how absolutely racist this is. And so when you see different fringe groups that become white supremacist and they're still affiliated or tied to Mormonism, they're backed up by Mormon doctrine today in the scriptures. And I know that's a whole separate conversation, but basically I just want to invite people to ponder the literal impact of the Book of Mormon being true. Do we really think that skin color came from a curse 2,000 years ago, or was it maybe DNA over quite a period of time? Did God really blacken his children to make them unattractive to the white folks? And that's not to be confused with the black doctrine, which is a whole separate problem. So I guess I just didn't realize what was at stake here. But I'll wrap it up by calling out again the ridiculous use of Brigham Young's quote in the LDS race essay, because what he really said was very, very different, very, very different than what was. It's dishonest, quite frankly. The use of Brigham Young's quote to the Utah legislature in 1852 as he was talking about.
Is there a visual about this?
No,
Okay,
I just want to call out the use of the Brigham Young quote in the race essay.
Oh, right.
And how insane that actually is in context of what Brigham was actually talking about is dishonest.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally dishonest.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, all right, tithing.
All right, tithing.
All right. So this one's important. This one's important because this is real, man. I mean, this is people's otherwise retirement money, kids' college money. Okay. And this is where we have to be delicate because I don't want to be accused of, the guy that can't fit through the needle. Like
The rich guy that can't fit through the eye of the needle.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out some things here. So basically the scripture that I always used on my mission of will a man rob God? We would lay that out to people, instructing them that God was telling them to pay the church, that this was God's command not to rob him, and he'll give us blessings, and we did pay the church. Well, if you really, I learned in context, he was actually chastising the priests for taking the money and being irresponsible with it, and he was chastising the priests for taking the people's money, and will they rob God? Am I correct on that context?
I've heard that before.
Yeah. So he wasn't telling the people to give the money to the church to receive blessings. He was chastising the corrupt priests for robbing God of what the context is absolutely different than how we use it in Mormonism to justify tithing, at least in the missionary discussions that I was instructed to give. Okay. So this is a big one. Let's go back to Craig's, missed in Sunday school here. Because this is, if you believe in modern revelation and prophets speaking for the Lord, I'm going to suggest it's really important that they get it right and that they transcribe it properly and don't alter it too much later. And so this is the one where it talks about the original revelation as declared through Snow, right? Okay. The original revelation included, I plead with you in the name of the Lord, and I pray that every man, woman, and child who has means shall pay 1/10 of their income. Now, this is when the church was in one of many periods of financial trouble, and they needed money to pay the debts. And so this is when they instituted a more formal program of tithing, which ebbed and flowed and evolved over the years. But the original, what was said was who has means, and it's important to follow this trajectory and see how it's impacting people's lives today, because they removed that at some point. I've got it in my notes here, but they altered that revelation. They took out who has means. And it's fascinating that those three words were removed. So now they've offered the blessings of tithing to everybody, not just those who has means. So it was originally put forth as a mechanism to pay off the church's debts, but now it's being put forth as a mechanism for spiritual and temporal blessings. And I want to explore the temporal transactional aspect of Mormon prosperity gospel, because I got to tell you, bud, when I was paying tithing sometimes, and I was actually feeling, honored and willing to give the Lord, my money, and I felt blessed and successful. And this is just what we do. We give money to the corporation of the first presidency, and they do something with it. And that's just what we do. And there's a gratification there that I felt proud to be able to help. Well, there's a number of angles here. I want to address the prosperity gospel aspect. And the church has now turned it into something like this. Can you do this one?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I invite people to really think about this, because the spiritual blessings of charity and donating, I'm not here to debate that. But what I am here to invite us to explore are the transactional nature of Mormon tithing. If paying tithing means that you can't pay for water or electricity, pay tithing.
So this is a quote from the Ensign, December 2012.
And this is one of many, many quotes there's some on the website, recent ones too.
So this is the tithing essay on the Mormon Stories Truth Claims page, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a lot of sources on there.
And read it.
Okay, so if paying tithing means that you can't pay your rent, pay tithing. Even if paying tithing means that you don't have enough money to feed your family, pay tithing. So there's this building transaction here that your rent, your utility bills, your food are somehow going to work out if you give your money to the church. But it gets better, John. It gets better. And this for me was one of those points. I watched Wendy Nelson, the prophet's wife, on this recent trip to Africa, their world tour. This was just last year. And she got up there and told the Africans, I don't know that it's going to be helpful for me to try to turn this around and play this video. I probably won't work in this format. Could we try it, or should I summarize it and let people go to the website? Let's do that. Okay. But this is so important. When I saw Wendy Nelson, the prophet's wife, standing before a crowd of Africans as the church is attempting to get into that community, and she relayed a story of, I think it was George Q. Cannon as a young man struggling, and he was paying tithing. And she said, she recounted the story of how the bishop told George, well, George, you're paying a very good tithing. And George said, well, I'm not paying tithing on what I earn. I'm paying tithing on what I want to earn. And she's she's espousing tithing seeding, whereby you pay tithing on what you want to earn next year. And she uses the terminology of what's something that would make your life better today? What eternal principle do you need to comply with to get that thing? She's turning it into a very transactional, material prosperity gospel of tithing seeding. This is the prophet's wife this year. It was April of 18. And when I see this, John, and you ponder the ramifications of taking money from poor people who don't have means, who are struggling to provide for their families, okay, I'm just going to cut it short and say, you know what? It better be true. The church better be true, or this is fraud. And this, to me, when I see the tithing seeding doctrine from the prophet's wife, this really lit me up. And this sparked one of the billboards that I sponsored. This is when I said, okay.
Thank you, Wendy Nelson.
Thank you. Because this cannot be. This can't be. Yeah. This is wrong.
Yeah. Dear friend Lindy writes, when I lived in Missouri, people in our ward would call their clunker cars tithing cars because basically their broken down old car was running because they paid tithing.
Right.
But also they weren't able to buy a new, healthy, safe, well-functioning car, at least in part because they were paying tithing. Yeah. And that, I for the first 12 years I did Mormon Stories, I wasn't able to buy cars that were safe for my children. Mm-hmm. So my kids were driving 15, 20-year-old. We still, right now, we drive a 19-year-old car and a 16-year-old car. Yeah. They're technically not safe for the road. I mean, they pass inspection barely, but when you're like not being safe.
Well, what about food and electricity and rent?
Right. Medical.
No, sorry, not to negate your car example, but cars for teenagers is a first world problem.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. Yeah.
Food.
Yep.
Africans, Latin Americans. So for me, and what I would invite anybody who's still not sure, I would really invite you to ponder and explore the church's financial system. I was the financial ward clerk, and I know a thing or two about finance. I mean, that's what I've done my whole career. I was shocked to discover that the church does almost no charitable work in a percentage of its net worth and in percentage of its annual receipts. First of all, there's little to no transparency and disclosure, so you got to struggle to find this stuff, but there are things on the site, and there have been official declarations and statements where I learned that the numbers of where that money is going is not where I thought. And I was one of those guys defending the church after Katrina as one of the first groups responding with water bottles. And, we have this great network. And I laud that work, and I support charity efforts. But a lot of that is actually individual members stepping up and doing things. Aside from the food banks and some very specific programs that the church does support, which are good, I'm just suggesting we contrast that with the building of shopping malls like is it City Creek that they call? Yeah. The City Creek shopping malls and corporate office towers. I mean, the church owns 2% of Florida with one of the largest cattle ranches in the country or the world. And all these for-profit enterprises that I learned were very, very different than where I thought my money was going. So I'm gonna cut that short because I don't want to get too in the weeds of the money aspect. And I know the brethren believe. I'm not questioning their belief for most of them. I'm sure statistically speaking, there's some closet, conversations going on there. But the financial aspect of the Mormon Church is something that I think most people haven't really looked at.
And I have to correct, one of your slides said the church is worth 40 billion or whatever.
It's way more than that.
It's hundreds of billions.
Yeah, which
just its financial holdings.
Well, and that was 2012.
Well, just its financial holdings exceed 100 billion. Could be in the hundreds of billions. Yeah. And then you add all this real estate assets. Yeah. It's if it hasn't already approached half a trillion.
Yeah.
It's approaching half a trillion.
And who knows what it is? It's a lot of money. And if the church is true, awesome. Let's build up the kingdom and Christ comes and we all live happily ever after. But if it isn't what it claims to be, and it doesn't have this exclusive authority, and this is before we get into the damage, and this is the hard part, as I don't think we'll have time to get into it. A lot of people toss up their hands. Well, so what? It's a good way to raise kids. It's a good community. You know, why are you tearing it down, John? And that's before you really start to comprehend the damage that can be done, especially if you're LGBT and you're raised in this kind of an environment. That's kind of a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. We've covered that a lot. Yeah. Just LGBT suicides and conversion therapy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. I mean, and again, this isn't, I'll say something controversial. I still think the Mormon Church does more good than harm.
Yeah.
I want it to be healthy and thrive. Mm-hmm. I love people who are in it. I respect people who are in it. I think it's reasonable to be a member and even beautiful. It creates good people, good families. Like I feel like I'm pro Mormon Church overall, but that's just how I feel.
Okay.
But if you look, I think part of the role or the responsibility of viewing the church as doing a lot of good is also being open about the harm that it does.
Right.
And so, Boyd K. Packer once said that the three great enemies to Mormonism are gays, feminists, and intellectuals.
Right.
Really what he's saying is some of the people that the church hurts most are LGBT people, women, and people who care about truth and science.
Yeah.
Because those are the people that get marginalized, mistreated, demeaned, shamed, not to mention all the cover-ups of sexual abuse and the sexual and body shaming that youth and adults often receive.
Well,
the point isn't to say tear it all down, it's evil, but it's to say we have to, and this is why Mormon Stories exists. It started in 2005 to say we need to talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And silence is the killer. So if we don't talk about it, the pain and the difficulty and the carnage is just going to continue. But if we talk about it, and as history has shown, the more we've talked about truth claims here and elsewhere, the more we've talked about LGBT people, the more we've talked about feminism and women, the more we've talked about racism and people of color, the more the church has improved.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but you are leading aspects of the church.
What?
You are leading aspects of the church. Their doctrinal changes and their policy changes are only coming about because people are leaving.
Yeah.
And the stakes for women, I'll just interject this because I don't think we'll have time to go deep on the women topic. The stakes for Mormon women could not be higher. If you're a Mormon woman, if you're right and the church is true, you get to share your husband with other women into the eternities, and polygamy is doctrine. Okay. And yes, there's things about it we can say we don't understand, but if we're right and it's true, you get to live eternal polygamy. If it's wrong and it's not true, I know from being the ward clerk, there were 100 out of 400 members of our ward right here were single women on the books, mostly inactive. And the active women that were there and throughout the church are making big sacrifices by dating only and pursuing marriage only with men that can take them to a Mormon temple. They're sacrificing opportunities to get married and have children and contribute in many ways that they desperately want to participate in. They're sacrificing relationships by, following the prophets and only, dating who you want to marry. So if it's not what it claims to be, I suggest the stakes for women are particularly high.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our point isn't don't be a Mormon. Our point isn't burn down the Mormon Church. It's Mormon Church keep changing. Russell M. Nelson, keep changing, keep making it better for women, for children, for abuse victims, for minorities, for LGBT people. Let's keep ferreting out the racism. Let's keep being more transparent with our history. And if you look at the pace of what Russell M. Nelson's done just in his year or whatever of being a prophet, if that pace keeps up, we may actually have a pretty decent church.
A 2-hour church.
In 10 years.
Yeah.
You like that trajectory. 3 to 2, right? You like the trend.
Oh, I won't, never mind. Yeah. Okay. Someone was joking. What if I told you there's a way you can have zero church? But hey, again, I support people that want to look at this and come away with their own conclusions. I honestly do. I at the same time hope to foster an environment of transparency and truth. And I think that our history matters. I think our foundational basis of authority and our truth claims matter. And so I appreciate, the opportunity to participate in that and call it truth claims, because for me, John, that's what it's about. It's about truth claims. Where you go with it individually and what truth you choose to embrace and distill and indoctrinate on your children. We've made that choice in our household based on what we could justify doing to our children and where we wanted to go, for the next decades of our life.
So a lot of people basically, and this comes from Jeffrey R. Holland and others, they basically use fear to parents to say, you can't leave the church if for no other reason than that, how are you going to raise your kids?
Right.
How are you going to produce healthy, happy, moral kids?
Yeah, where will you go?
Without the church.
Sure.
But I find a lot of people leave the church to protect their kids.
Absolutely.
To keep their kids from being taught racist, sexist, and homophobic teachings.
Totally.
And so it's more it's more save your kids from the church. Now, I think good,
and that's
good
really
people
hard.
are
That's
raised,
hard for people to grasp.
Well, I think good people are raised in and out of Mormonism. I think Mormonism produces great people.
Sure.
But it does harm. And so I can see why some people would leave for their kids, not in spite of the well-being of their kids.
So as we were, I know maybe if we still have a little time here to wrap up, because I know we've gone long, as we were being vocal about our questions and our truth crisis and what we were encountering, we have a good relationship. We had, with some of the members of our stake presidency. One of them was David McKay, as in the grandson of David O. McKay. And I'd speak respectfully of Dave. He's a friend of ours. My wife and his wife, knew each other from teaching school. And so, and he knew me and respected me in business and what we've accomplished and who we are and our reputation, both individually and professionally. And so, we spent many hours together and right here on this couch and these chairs and the stake president and Dave McKay, and we talked and they sincerely were trying to come to terms with why families are leaving. Why are people like us, a primary president and, an acting primary president, decided not to ordain her son into the priesthood? Our ward at the time only got one of the 4 deacon age boys that was turning 12, ordained into the priesthood. The other 3 left. And the only one that got ordained was being supported by the church and the members for daily sustenance, quite frankly. And so they're struggling to comprehend why families like us are leaving. And I just invite you to explore the truth claims, because for most of us, if it's not true, where you go with it from there is entirely up to you, but it's generally not ending well for the church's narrative when people dig a little deeper and conclude that the truth matters. And we didn't find an alternative narrative, John. We looked, and to try to come up with an alternative narrative or a way to survive in the church that still pretty much requires orthodoxy and sustaining doctrines and prophets that maybe you have a hard time sustaining, there's not much left.
So what about the people that actually conclude that truth doesn't matter? In other words, they just say,
right, yeah.
No, it's a good way to keep faithful in my marriage It makes me happy, gives me some spiritual juice every Sunday. It's a great place to raise your kids.
Right.
It's a great place to find community. Sure. All churches are flawed. The United States is flawed. I don't leave the United States.
Sure.
So it's all metaphor.
Right.
The scriptures are metaphorical.
Right.
They're like Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. They help us live better lives.
Right.
And this is just my tribe, my culture, my heritage.
Sure. Well, I didn't see the
why
damage.
didn't you guys do that?
I didn't see the harm either, and I don't think many people will see the harm. And quite frankly, it's not the greatest place to raise your kids, as some of them think. We're fortunate, as I point outside and look around. We live in a very good community, and it's diverse. My kid plays with kids whose names I can hardly pronounce. There's Indians, there's Asians, there's a black kid, there's every race and language around this town. The tech industry drives a lot of that, as you know. If I lived in a secular, an insular, Mormon, Idaho, Utah community, you don't have that diversity, and you have an entirely different community structure and feel. And I understand that need to remain tied to that community. I don't have that need, but I definitely understand and respect those that are in those communities where it's everything. I mean, it's your culture, it's your neighborhood, it's and I will say it's not cool, John. It's not fun. I would lay awake nights with headaches. I gained weight. I was sitting here, studying and stressing and eating, and it's a very, very difficult process to work your way through. And with your spouse, I have friends whose wife or husband threatens to, vaporize the relationship if they tell the kids Lamanites aren't real. I mean, the church's adherence to these truth claims is damaging relationships. And these families that we proclaim to champion and be all about, of course, we all support that, but I gotta suggest they take a peek at the damage that's being done when one spouse wakes up and realizes that they can't sustain this. And I've had friends come over, and we've become known in the community a little bit because we do talk, and we'll continue to talk. And I had a friend come over who I hadn't seen in 2 years. They moved out of the ward, but he called me to borrow a tool. And that speaks to the community of Mormonism, where you can call someone you haven't seen. It was at least a year, and it might have been 2, out of the blue, and say, I need to come borrow your table saw. Yeah, no problem. Come over. I mean, there's a community strength. After cutting, he did have some boards he needed to cut. But then the conversation ensued about his wife had discovered some things and had read the CES letter and had left the church, and he was really struggling. And what did I think about that? And, 2 hours later, we'd had a really good, supportive conversation. And you're not going to get that very often inside the walls of the church. Because believe me, John, we looked and we tried, and it just wasn't there. And I mean, so that's what we're trying to support, is a greater community and a greater dialogue, because people need help. And they need a community where they can feel safe. And right now it's mostly online, these groups and things. And that's where I think, we haven't really talked much about the billboards and the campaigns. I want to bring this stuff public. I don't want to hide behind private groups, which, we're not hiding, but they're private groups because people fear intimidation. They fear loss of family and connectivity. They fear being, outcast and ridiculed. And so I just stand up and say, you know what? Here we are. This is what we look like. 2 years ago, we were leading your communities and holding positions of callings.
Teaching your children.
We were teaching your children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are going through this faith crisis. Not everyone's writing 30 plus essays.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Digging into the history.
Right.
And not everybody's financing billboard campaigns.
Right.
What makes you willing to sort of go that extra mile to really educate and serve other people when you could spend that money on other things and spend that time in other ways?
Right. Well, you've seen my motorcycles and my collection. I do spend it on other things, but John, at first, I'll be honest, I can't pretend that this is all charity and chivalry. I mean, I was pissed. It starts off with anger. Mm-hmm. I was lied to. I was deceived. There's this path of loss, and I was pissed. And that betrayal of my entire worldview and how much I've dedicated to this church and my family and the time. So part of it was me processing. I never started out to write essays, John. I just needed to organize my notes. That's how I do things. And I needed to understand and to process it. And by the time I was done, it had turned into a work that needed to be shared, even though there's already really good works out there. So then I saw the impact that it could have as we shared this with some people and we talked with other people, like that gentleman that came over and needed some help. And I realized that, fortunately I was raised, one of the good things in Mormonism is I was taught to be charitable and to help my community. And so I view this, the church would not agree with this, but Mormon Stories is a nonprofit charitable organization that spreads truth, just like the Mormon Church thinks it does. And so I viewed this as an opportunity to support a cause that I believe in. And the billboards, I got to tell you, were pretty empowering, man. I mean, if you want to have a voice, get a website and get some billboards. And the first one we did was the feedback on that was it was noticed, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And that was the treasure digging one. And then we said, okay, well, that might have been controversial, even though the church has admitted, okay, so let's do the Book of Mormon. And we did the Book of Mormon. So anyway, my motives are multifaceted.
And now we've got, now the billboard campaign is, it says faith crisis ?
Right.
You are not alone.
And, yeah.
MormonStories.org. And we've got them in Rigby, Idaho Falls, and is it Pocatello?
I lose track. I've lost
and then
track.
We've also got one in, I think Spanish Fork.
Yeah.
And then one in Provo Orem.
Yeah. We need one in St. George.
And we're looking for one more. We want to get one in St. George.
Yeah.
But these billboards have made a big difference.
Yeah.
And, it's actually relatively cheap.
Yeah, it is.
To fund a billboard.
Compared to what we were doing in Salt Lake.
Yeah, we're able to, the one in Salt Lake that we did early on. And there was even one before you, I think.
Yeah.
Which was the one that just said.
Right. And then we carried it on.
What was the first one? The first one was,
I don't know.
It was like, you are not alone. What was it?
I remember more when I pay for them, so I don't know.
Oh, it's the one my friend Travis designed. Anyway, oh, it was Know Your Religion. It was the Know Your Religion.
Oh, yeah.
Campaign.
Well, we did that too, right?
Yeah.
Didn't we do that
you helped out with that. Yeah.
We did that in Idaho.
Know Your Religion.
Yeah.
Yep. Know Your Religion.
So let's talk about that, because basically we were paying for the board in Salt Lake, which was horribly expensive.
It was $6,000 a month.
Well, yeah, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah.
It was like $30,000 for half a year, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that board got changed to an electronic board, and we didn't want to go that. So we discovered we could literally get like 8 boards in more
for the price
of one board.
And we also did an analysis, which was
viewership.
We decided to do how many Mormon eyeballs per dollar.
Totally. Emphasis on Mormon eyeballs.
Because like Salt Lake City's half Mormon, half not Mormon.
Who cares if we're preaching to half of that town?
It's a total different deal if it's Utah County or Rexburg, Idaho.
Totally.
And we wanted to know what the traffic was. So it's Mormon eyeball per dollar.
Yeah, right.
And we realized that we could get billboards in strategic places for $500 a month instead of, $6,000 a month. And so we could have 6 billboards for the price of one, basically.
So why can't we just leave it alone, John? So then I bumped into that other gentleman who shall not be named, who heard what we were doing, and I talked with him and shared, hey, here's what it is and here's why I'm doing it. And then he said, well, I can do that. So he chipped in, and then another person, and now we've got this opportunity, quite frankly, where I think the tipping point is upon us here, where if the church wants to change its narrative and change its tune and cut back to fewer hours and change the marriage laws in the temple and blah blah blah, I mean that's all the result of people like us that pushed back. And so even if you want to stay in the church and you think it's a good place to raise children, I suggest we can make this even better for you by forcing the truly crazy false doctrine stuff out and distilling that down to a more sustainable religious path that does benefit people. I'm all for that, John. I'm all for that.
You want to improve Mormonism for the people who remain in it.
Well, of course. A lot of my family's still in it.
Yeah.
It could be a lot better.
Yeah.
And for those that want to leave because they no longer need this safety chain, whatever you want to call it, if you no longer believe it, it's a transition, and you have to come to terms with not knowing what you thought you knew.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. But I think the billboards now, we're at a point where we have a fun campaign going, and we've had tremendous feedback from people that say it made their day and it's helping them out, and it's forcing the discussions a little bit more into the public, and people are more comfortable having discussions and bringing things up. And I think that's all good. I think it's good.
Yeah. And our goal has actually never been to cause people to leave the church. And honestly, in my view, if somebody knows all the history, they know the harm that the church causes, but they decide that for them, they really want to stay in it and that it works for them, that's great. The things that are unacceptable to me are people who are in Mormonism or converted to Mormonism under false pretenses, where they don't know what they're a part of.
Right.
If any of those people would want, just like you a few years ago, right? Just imagine there are people like you who just haven't gone through what you went through a few years ago, right? They just don't know about your stuff, CES letter, Mormon Stories, etc. So if there are people in the world who want to know about the Church's truth claims and or the way that it can harm people, but that they don't know now, we do want to give them a chance of knowing what they're really a part of. That's number one. But then the other huge audience that we care about are, and this is, I think, who the billboard's really helping the most. There are a lot of people that are going to see a billboard and go, oh, that's just a Mormon billboard, or oh, that's an anti-Mormon billboard. The people that the billboards are reaching most are the people who are suffering alone, the people who are going through a faith crisis, but they can't talk to their parents, they can't talk to their spouse, they can't talk to their elders quorum, they can't talk to their bishop, and they feel like they're the only person. They're going crazy, their world is dark, and they've got no one to talk to, no friends, no community that they can connect with. If they can go to Mormon Stories, they can watch all these stories of people and understand that there are lots and lots of other people who have been through it. They can get tips and tricks on how to navigate a faith crisis. We've got the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis podcast, which has over 60 free hours of content on how to navigate a faith crisis. We gave that away for free on purpose. We didn't want to hold that behind a firewall so that only therapists getting paid $200 an hour, could disseminate that information. Margie and I and Natasha just wanted to make that free. So all that content is there to help support people who are otherwise alone and desperate and dark and sad. Navigate a faith crisis so they're not alone and so they don't wreck their lives and so they can come out the other end happy and healthy.
Well, what I learned, and it was a result of us being vocal, which I have a hard time not being, is there are people right now sitting in the pews and sitting on the stands that absolutely are struggling with this, and they know what they know, or they're figuring out what they're figuring out. And it's so toxic to try to deal with that in an environment of shame and of fear, secrecy, sacredness,
suppression.
Same thing. It's so hard. And it's difficult to know who to talk to. So when I became vocal about it, you'd be surprised who pulled me aside and whispered, hey, there's a lot of people that are scratching at this. And there's people that are sitting there on the stand every week, just killing themselves to sustain this image. I'm in touch
with active bishops that don't believe. But they are church employees or other things, and either they'll lose their job if they step down, or they'll bring shame to their family, or it'll wreck their business.
Big time.
So there are people serving in stake presidencies, stake high councils, bishoprics, Relief Society, young women's, young men's. I guess young men's doesn't exist anymore, but there are people serving all throughout the church that don't believe, but they're trapped and they can't do anything.
And why is that such a big deal, John? You don't believe. Is that so threatening? Is that so? What does that mean? You don't believe. If the church is adhering to this absolutely unsustainable, dogmatic, orthodox approach. Now they've softened some things, and there's been some talk of but then they get out and they bust out some other mind-numbing talk about disparaging those that have left as weak and fallen. And so they're trying to sort of figure this out, but they're still not really there in terms of understanding just how fragile their narrative is. I think they sort of kind of are getting it, but just how easily this thing can be grasped by people these days that just want to look and know it's happening, it's accelerating, and they're really not dealing with it well.
Yeah.
And it's bishop roulette. You've got some bishop that's going to pull you aside and tell you how he's worried about your salvation and, and give you this guilt trip, saying he's worried about your salvation in a passive aggressive way. And then you have others that are awesome and supportive and get it. And for the church to continue, I suggest, just like Richard Bushman said, it's not only going to have to change its narrative, it's going to have to fundamentally restructure its ethical treatment of its members, because they're not going for it. Once they discover that certain truths aren't true, there's not much left. For me, I didn't find a career path once I brought these topics up with leadership. It was either true or not true. Because once you can't get a temple recommend because you no longer sustain certain things, there's not much left.
Yeah. So back to the billboard. These billboards are set to expire in a few months. Mm-hmm. We may have the current donors renew their donations. They may or may not. But what we want to do is just say, if any of you want to sponsor a billboard in St. George, if you want to sponsor a billboard in Gilbert, Arizona, or Mesa or Chandler, Arizona, in Boise, if you want to sponsor one in Logan or Cache Valley or Preston or Franklin, Idaho, wherever you are, if there's a high concentration of Mormons, you can, and if you have friends
right,
who want to go in with you in your local area, you can pool together. Literally $500 a month can sponsor a really nice billboard in a prominent area in a highly dense Mormon town. And again, the goal isn't to take people out of the church. It's just to rescue those who are suffering alone, to let them know that they're not alone, and to provide them with resources. And for those who want to know the truth, it gives them an opportunity to learn it if they want to. But if they don't want to, they just ignore the billboard, call it anti-Mormon, and they move right along. So it's a win-win for everybody. Right. Everybody wins. And it's far less than the 10%. I think with 1% of your income in a given month, especially if you team with other people, we can dot the globe with Mormon Stories billboards.
Well, and I think that the game has changed these days, where of course we can do social media and Google Analytics, but see, that's already occurring, right? I mean, we're already getting presence online. The power of bringing it visible within communities and making it less stigmatized to have these discussions with your family members, with your spouse, your friends, your coworkers, it helps. It helps.
Yeah, old media sometimes, there's a reason why car dealers still use billboards, right? Because the old media makes a difference still, and that includes billboards.
And I don't know, I guess I would go back, John, to, let's use the tithing doctrine of, those with means. A lot of people might really love this idea, and we've done it in the past, and we get a lot of $50 donations. There's people listening to this, or that will listen to this, that have means, and they've struggled perhaps to figure out what they want to do about their faith crisis, truth crisis, transition, the things they're learning. And, if this makes sense, if this resonates, I would say reach out to you offline directly. And, we could partner and make something happen there. So it's potentially finding select larger donors that want to get involved, but it's also, as you say, I think there's merit in smaller donations pooled to drive it within certain communities.
So if you want to support a billboard, just reach out, message me, email me at mormonstories@gmail.com, say, hey, I want to sponsor a billboard, and we'll make it happen. It's all tax deductible. It's a win-win for everybody. Right. Really quickly, Mike, do you want to talk about your own stake president and what's going on in your membership, or do you want to just not talk about that?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll talk about it. No, I'm fine talking about it. I don't know if my wife's going to be super thrilled talking about that.
Don't make your wife angry.
But let me just put it this way: people that know me should know me well enough to understand that I'm probably going to do what I think is right. And I'm not going to be cowed by somebody's manufactured authority on who I should or shouldn't listen to or what I should or shouldn't do. We're past that point. And it took me a while to see the harm that this doctrine and that this culture inflicts upon families. And I don't expect believing families to see it, because they're perfectly happy in a very white upper middle class dogma. And if it works for them, great. But it's not working for a lot of people. And I didn't realize that. And I was part of that. And I'm not going to be part of something that I know is doing harm and that's not true. Does that answer that?
Sure. Yeah. However you're comfortable.
Yeah. But I did have, because we had a number of direct discussions with the stake presidency, but it didn't go anywhere because they've got nowhere to go. And we were and I'm gonna give a shout out to my wife. Okay. My wife, as the primary president, was the one that told our bishop that she's not ordaining her 12-year-old son into the priesthood because, blah, blah, blah. That was my wife, my beloved, beautiful primary president wife. So I am so proud of her for at least being willing to acknowledge what we found and confronting it instead of just, dare I say, burying her head in the sand, because that's a lot easier to do. So anyway, they kind of know where we're at. And their approach, I think it's worth addressing, John, because their approach is to passive aggressively threaten, because of course they think they have this special authority. I mean, their worldview is so narrow and it's so indoctrinated. I really don't expect them, when I say them, I don't expect them to see this differently right now, John. There's certain people and leaders that will, but most of them just view this as, like the stake president that was doing the excommunication. Was it Bill Reel or who? Or no, was it the Johnson family where they accuse, they're partnering with you to practice priestcraft or something? Mm-hmm. Who was that guy? That was one of those stake presidents. Mm-hmm. You're going to get a lot of those. Mm-hmm. There's really no room within Mormonism's authority structure for dissent at this level. Yeah. And yet
it's our work of dissent that's actually transforming the church.
It's the only reason.
So there's no local tolerance for Sam Young or Bill Reel or me or Jeremy Runnels or anyone who dissents. And yet we are literally transforming the church through our grassroots efforts.
Yep.
And you can directly tie Rough Stone Rolling, the essays, the church's progress on women, their reversals on LGBT stuff.
Right. They can witness baptisms now, John.
Yeah, all the changes, the shortening of church, the transparency, all that stuff you can tie to the work of activists that the church then turns around and excommunicates.
Totally. Well, then they adopt their policies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
those that they excommunicate.
So you excommunicate Sam for advocating for protection of children.
Yeah.
Then you protect children.
Yeah. But John, most believing members within earshot of this have no idea who Sam is.
Right.
And they have no idea that interviewing teenagers about sexual matters behind closed doors is a problem.
Yeah.
And they have no idea of the sexual cover-up scandals and reporting to attorneys that don't make it to the police. And I will tell you this, I do have experience where when I grew up in Anchorage, there was a rash of child abuse and molestation going around that town. And there were quite a few. And these were just the ones that we knew of. And some were reported to the police and went to jail, and others just got their hands slapped and counseling and whatever church discipline that amounted to, and off they went. So that's a whole nother topic. I think that would tarnish our message today, but because I just don't think they get it, John.
Well, they're starting to get it, and they'll eventually get it. So, man, I think we kind of covered it all. Is there anything we haven't covered?
No, I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate the chance to speak and to share. And I will apologize in advance for whatever I offended or didn't get right. But I welcome any correction of historical facts or citations or references. I'm just a guy who did my best, man. I just did what I could, and I hope it makes a difference. And I know I speak for others. We're grateful for not just you, but others that are out there. The Sams of the world and others that have a voice and that aren't afraid to speak up and participate. That's what it's all about. And it all distills down, I think, to a better world, better communities, better families. And, I would invite those that might have questions, or even, families and friends that if you want to talk about it, I'll be glad to talk about it. I don't really expect very many of them to take us up on that, but we're here and we're comfortable talking about it. Hopefully without getting, too preachy. But if anybody really wants to know or wants help, I do think we've got a pretty good grasp of what's gone on behind the scenes. So I encourage people to keep pulling and keep digging and just keep at it, because there's a point at which you think you're going crazy and you think you're the one who's, depending on where you're at in your faith journey. And, that I didn't know what gaslighting meant. I'd never really heard that term, right? But I know there's a lot of people out there that'll listen to this and it'll serve as validation that, you're not crazy. You're on the right track, and it's okay.
Absolutely. And just really quickly to make one final plug for it, I'm going to just take you visually to the Mormon Stories website, and there's the third menu item over, which is Truth Claims. You click on it. The first option is project description, which talks about the Examining Mormon Truth Claims project, and it gives a breakdown of the different essays and topics, along with the chronology. And then under Truth Claims, you can go to Joseph Smith and see sub-items. Under the books, you can go to Book of Mormon and see sub-items. You can see all the different, Book of Abraham, Kinderhook plates, etc., Joseph Smith translation. Under Mormon Doctrine, you've got doctrinal changes, polygamy, priesthood restoration, temple ceremony, masonry, which we didn't even talk about.
Yeah, right.
Race and skin color tithing. Then Mormon culture, which talks about truth seeking and epistemology and word of wisdom and violence in Mormonism.
The violence one was fascinating.
Women
too.
in Mormonism, yeah. And then, of course, last but not least, this wonderful chronology that's the most underappreciated part of the entire site, which is this huge comprehensive chronology of Mormon history that, when you read it in sequence, explains a whole lot about all the things that you used to be confused about or not understand or think was Satan or the devil or evil people. It all comes together and makes sense once you read the chronology. So please read it, please share it, and enjoy it, because it's there to help you and others who want to know the truth. And that's what it's all about.
Thanks, John.
Really quickly, for those who don't know, Thrive Beyond Mormonism is coming up November 17th. You can meet Amber Scora November 16th, 7 p.m. in the evening. We're doing a book signing with Amber Scora, author of Leaving the Witness. And then on November 17th at the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, starting at 9 a.m., we're going to have a general conference for post-Mormonisms, not criticizing Mormonism, not attacking the church, 100% focused on healing and growth and community beyond Mormonism. And we hope you'll go to thrivebeyondmormonism.com. Register for it. It's only $15. We will lose money on the event from the fees that people pay because the Salt Palace is expensive and we're flying people in, and we're grateful for those who have donated to support it. But this event will lose money. Nobody's making money, in any reasonable way off of this from the ticket sales. It's just purely we're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts to try and help as many people as possible heal and grow and find community. So please check us out and come to Thrive, the Thrive Conference. Cool. And all right, Mike.
All right.
And support our billboard, right?
Well, and let's encourage, as you always do, if there's any comments or if anyone wants certain information, let's put it in the comment. We'll try to get back to people with questions and information.
Yeah, and if you don't like the essays, if you've got improvements, if there are inaccuracies, we love that.
Yeah.
Because your feedback will help us make them more accurate.
Right.
So go through the essays. If we've left something out, if we've got something wrong, if something you don't like, if tone is bad, if it's too acerbic, if you have ideas on how to make the essays more palatable to people who would read it, email us at mormonstories@gmail.com, and we'll make changes.
We'll take it through like the 15th round of scrubbing for tone, right?
All right, Mike Brown, you're awesome.
All right,
And
thank you. Thank you.
I just want to thank you personally and Marnie and other people who've supported. Again, a lot of us go through a faith crisis. Very few of us work to turn that into something that can bless and help other people. And your essays, the website, the billboard, this podcast, I just want to congratulate you, putting your money and your time and your effort and your heart where your mouth is, and helping people. Few people reach out and try and make a difference at the level you have. It's made a huge difference for Mormon Stories, for the Open Stories Foundation, for me, and for thousands of people. So thank you.
The party we're having tomorrow has gone nuts. We're going to need a bigger boat.
There's no boat, but is it like 70 people now?
We'll tell you later. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So if you're in Seattle, come to our party tomorrow night, and we'd love to meet you and see you. Tomorrow, interviewing Radio Free Mormon. I'm not sure I can go another 8 hours, but we have to interview Radio Free Mormon, his brilliance. He's making a big difference with his podcast, thanks to Bill Reel and Mormon Discussions podcast. So tomorrow we'll come right back and we'll interview Radio Free Mormon with more Mormon Stories podcast. So take care, everybody. And thanks to all our live listeners who joined us and viewers. It's so great to have people join us live. It makes this all more fun and interesting. So spread the word. Give us a positive review on Amazon. Give us a positive review on the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page. Share this stuff. Share it on social media. And please donate. If you don't donate, please donate at mormonstories.org. It's all tax deductible, and it will go towards helping people like you and providing more of this content. $10, $50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. Go to mormonstories.org and become a donor. And we'll keep changing Mormonism, and we'll help people in Mormonism, and we'll help everyone who's left it. It's a win-win for everybody. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks again, Mike. You're awesome.